All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. This is Rebecca Griffin speaking, and I'm the Student Services and Admissions Officer at SCO. I'm happy you can join us, and I'm seeing a lot of names that are familiar, so I think we have a great mixed group of people who are going through the interview process for optometry school right now, and perhaps a few others that are looking to do so in another year or two. So we're hoping this is a good topic for you all to learn about, what the actual interview process looks like and what you'd be going through on that very important and sometimes intimidating day. So with me, I have Mr. Joe Hauser, who's our Vice President for Student Services here, and he's going to speak with y'all about, skills and things that you can be mindful of in preparing for your interview, and he'll outline a little bit about the actual interview day, and at least here at SCO, the different activities you'd be participating in. And so, excuse me. I'm going to hand over the presentation to him, and please feel comfortable throughout the day or throughout the presentation today to go ahead and put your questions into that question box on the webinar system. I'll take a look at them, and then we'll be sure to answer your questions at the end, but we want to make sure to address anything that's on your mind. So let's go ahead and dive in.
Well, welcome everybody. Like Ms. Griffin said, I'm Joe Hauser. I'm the Vice President for Students. I've been at SCO for 27 years now, and happy to kind of share my perspective of what SCO and really what I think most optometry schools are looking for in the interview process, and some vital things that are important for you. At least speaking for SCO, starting off with what are the essentials? In other words, why do we even interview? We want to find out the applicant's experience overall, but specifically optometry experience. Do you have the discipline, organization, etc., to succeed? And then you might not really think of this as overtly, but have you thought this through? We like to see applicants that have planned this out. It's not a whimsical decision on your part to pursue optometry. So sometimes the interview questions can be phrased to talk about your timeline, how often and for how long have you shadowed and talked with various optometrists. So those are just to kind of get the ball rolling, because I think it's important to know why a school interviews, and each school does interview differently. But those are the three big things, talking about your overall experience, your optometry experience. Another thing about interview questions is that an interviewer may have a set number of questions that he or she likes to ask, but your responses might provide for tangential questions. So depending on how you respond, the interviewer may follow up with a question or two. So that's that. So usually when I interview, and I'm one of the backup interviewers here at SCO, I always like to start off with the optometric aspects first. Talk about your work shadowing. Sometimes I'll get a question, or in admissions we'll get a question, which one's more important? Is it more important to work, or is it more important to shadow? And there are pros to both. Obviously, work experience gives you probably more depth in a particular office, but if you work in one practice only, it may limit your breadth of diversity. Whereas in shadowing, it may be easier to see multiple offices or different types of practices in a relatively short time. So both are good. It's not that one is better than the other, but be prepared to talk to your interviewer about your particular shadowing and work experience. When we say experience in high pressure situations, that can be a little misleading. For example, I like to ask the question, what was your biggest challenge in undergrad, and how did you overcome it? High pressure can be academic, it can be work, it can be family, it can be personal, it can mean a lot of different things. But when you're going into a four-year doctorate program like optometry, it will be, you will have some new challenges and struggles most likely during that time. So understandably, schools may want to know, how have you handled pressure, stress, challenges in the past, and you might want to be thinking about one or two particular aspects. Adaptability. You may be, and I say this complimentary, you might be the brightest student in your biology class or in your pre-optometry group or whatever cohort you may have in undergrad. But when you join a professional program, you might be middle of the pack, and that's okay. What do they call the student who has the lowest GPA at the end of the 4 years? Doctor. So therefore, you don't have to graduate summa cum laude to be a good student. But sometimes that can be an adjustment for undergrad. You're so used to making all A's that when you come to optometry school, making B's might be just fine, but it might be a little bit of an adjustment for you to handle. And then ability and willingness to sacrifice. One of the questions I'll pose, it's Friday afternoon. You're probably ready to go home for the weekend. We do not have Saturday, Sunday instruction here at SCO. And you get a 4:30 patient call, or maybe your 4:30 patient shows up 30 minutes late. And you really would like to go home for the weekend, but that patient shows up in need of care and service. And how do you respond to that is another indicator of your professionalism and commitment to serving others. Now, at SCO, we have over a 98% graduation rate. So we're admitting smart students. But it's not only academic acumen that allows you to graduate. You have to have the willpower, you have to have the drive to succeed. So sometimes on the interview, we want to ask you questions that gives us at least a better handle. For example, your ability to balance life and school. What outside activities are you involved in? There's not a formula or a cookie cutter approach to that. You may be really involved with one and only one aspect, but if you're really into whether it be personal fitness or whether it be activities at organizations at school or church or community, that's perfectly fine. We just kind of want to know what those thresholds are. To demonstrate your experience, again, I'll go back to the optometric experience. I have a belief that the more you know about optometry, the stronger your conviction is going to help you get through those tough times. That first midterm that kind of kicks you in the gut, let's say it's pharmacology and you make a C, you're not used to making C's. Your drive and conviction to optometry will help you get through those rough bumps in the road and everything. So we want to know about your experience and your passion. That kind of leads into the strength of desire for the profession. We want, I think that SCO has a 98+% graduation rate because we evaluate those things. Speaking of that, I will say, if you have not yet been invited for an interview, Mike Robertson, our Director of Admissions, will be the one who typically determines your eligibility or whether or not you're invited. Sometimes Mr. Robertson will contact an applicant who has good numbers, but maybe their on their application, their demonstrated shadowing is a little bit lacking. Maybe you've only shadowed in one practice for a handful of hours, and he'll reach out and say, well, John, Jane, I really think that you need to have a few more hours before we invite you for an interview. And it's for your own well-being. It's not to make you jump through a hoop. And we evaluate that as far as if you were asked to go shadow another practice or two, did you go out and do it? That's a part of the admissions process also. As far as sacrifices you made in work shadowing, we like to see, if your mother or father is an optometrist and all your shadowing has been in that practice, it may be a great practice, that's great, but it wasn't very difficult for you to get those shadowing hours. Conversely, if you have researched and looked up different practices in your hometown or where you go to college and sought those doctors out to get more shadowing, that's another demonstration of you really want this in your experience.
And I'll just add really quickly to what Mr. Hauser was saying, because as an admissions officer, I get the question quite a bit about how important extracurricular activities are. And oftentimes students want to know how important it is to be involved in things like pre-optometry club or health professions interest clubs and those sorts of things. And it's absolutely wonderful if you can engage in those kinds of activities as an undergraduate student, but it doesn't need to be just optometry specific activity that you put on your application or that you talk about during your admissions interview, because any kind of extracurricular activity, as Mr. Hauser was alluding to, does show that when you have an interest or you have a passion in something, whether it be healthcare and caring for people, or if it's underwater basket weaving or whatever it is that you're interested in, that you actually dedicate your time and your free time and energy to pursuing those activities rather than just going home after class every day. And so put all of the extracurricular activities that you're involved in as an undergraduate student on your application, and talk, be prepared to talk about a few of those that have been especially important to you, because that demonstrates not only that you have those passions, that you pursue them, but also, as we spoke about, that you can balance that time. Because when you start optometry school, it's going to be an intensive experience. Your first semester at SCO, you're up against 24, 25 credit hours. So when we can see that you attended classes, that you did well academically, but you also were balancing that with extracurricular, leadership, service, all of those types of activities, we know that you're prepared to handle a pretty busy schedule here at SCO.
Okay. Have you done your homework? And this is a figurative statement here. We don't actually send you homework to do in advance of your interview. But as we have referenced before, understanding the commitment as far as what it takes to become an optometrist, do you have realistic goals, objectives? If I'm interviewing someone and I say, what are your goals as an optometrist? And they say, I want to make $1 million a year and work 1 day a week, that's probably not a realistic goal or an understanding of what an optometrist or healthcare provider does. I think this is one where it's healthy for you to talk to your optometrist. Talk to him or her about what are the political aspects of optometry, as far as, like, if you're from Missouri, if you're from Wisconsin, if you're from Arkansas, if you're from Nebraska, etc. What's going on in those states as far as what might be cutting edge legislative pushes? Understanding, healthcare matters as far as access and other issues that are critical to doctors. The more you know about that as an applicant, it does come across impressively to us on the interview. You may even get asked a question, did you consider other healthcare fields? And that's fine. If you started off pre-med or pre-dent or in your freshman year of college, and over the course of time you changed, don't shy away from that. The question may be more than, well, what was it about optometry that was more attractive than dentistry or pharmacy or medicine or whatever the original option may be? Just be prepared to talk about it, because it does give us a chance to get a little more insight into you.
And another thing you'll want to do a little bit of homework on, of course, is the institution you're interviewing at. So know the strengths of the school. Talk to students is one of the best things I think you can do. And we're always happy to connect you with students who are currently here and alumni of our institution, so you can get a sense from them, what their experience was like as a student. We have a lot of students from outside of the state of Tennessee that attend. Since we're a private school, we have, I think, around 43-ish states represented in terms of our current student body. So we're happy to connect you with students from your home state when possible, or anybody that shares common interests or similarities. And so that's one great resource you can lean on in terms of learning about the institution and getting to know what it's like to be a student in optometry school. So definitely tap into that resource as well.
And along the homework lines, I forgot to mention, and I think other interviewers will say this, I'm usually either more or at least equally impressed by the questions you have for me than your response to my questions. So if you go online and look at our website or develop a question or two that you remember. You're interviewing us as much as we're interviewing you. So we want the interview day to be more conversational than one-sided. And I learn a lot from the questions that applicants will ask me, and it will show insight and will show preparedness. So don't feel like it's a one-way street when communicating with us and or I think any other school. If you have a question or two that's important, don't be hesitant to ask that on the interview. Okay, the admissions process, this might modestly be different, but I think it's overall similar at all optometry schools. You have to submit your Optomcast application and your SEO supplemental along with the app fee and supporting documents. Then the application is processed and transcripts evaluated. This is by Optomcast and then sent to us. We cannot invite, and nor should any school invite one for an interview until your Optomcast is validated and GPA verified. So if you apply this time of year, it takes about 3 weeks or so. If you submitted your Optomcast application today, the schools of optometry would probably have the verified or completed validated application, sometime in early September. But that is something to keep in mind with that. Once your Optomcast is verified and GPA validated, Mike Robertson, our admissions director, along with the others on the admissions team, can see and evaluate your application. Mr. Robertson will be the one who typically will make the selection and invite for an interview. That comes via email. So if you were to get an email from Mike Robertson this time of year, it might be inviting you for an interview. Usually, he gives you several dates from which to choose. A solid, 3-4 weeks out. Just look at your calendar. We typically interview on Fridays. We do a few Mondays in September as well. But looking on your calendar as far as what days might work for you, and then you're instructed on how to secure that date. And then you have the actual on-campus interview. It's about a 4.5 hour process. It includes lunch, which is a kind of a working lunch with housing and financial aid. The interview itself is a closed file one-on-one interview. So the interviewer does not have anything in front of him or her. Because of that, you also have a counseling session, which is with like Rebecca, myself, or others in the admissions office to go over the open file. And then you'll get a complete tour of campus given by at least one of our students. And that really is the longest part of the day. The tour is about an hour and a half or a solid third of the day. And then if we interview on a Friday or a Monday, we typically meet as an admissions committee that following Tuesday and get back with you, usually by phone call to let you know where you stand.
And one thing we harp on throughout the advising process with students who are interested, so if you've been to one of our webinars before, if you sat in, you've heard us say that early application is key. So if you are planning to go through the admissions process or you're planning to apply this cycle and you haven't submitted your application yet, we recommend working on that as soon as you can. Just because a lot of schools, us included, we do a rolling admissions process. So we've already begun interviewing candidates. We've already started to accept. And we've already started to consider those candidates for things like scholarships and other sorts of reduced tuition programs. We have a pretty robust scholarship endowment here, and we award quite a few scholarships to incoming students, but we're going to award those to the most highly credentialed candidates as they come in. And it does take, as Mr. Hauser said, a little bit of time for your application to process once it's been submitted. So the sooner you can submit your application, the better. One thing that I often advise on, if you're waiting to take the OAT, you want to take it in September because you feel like that's going to give you the amount of time you need to prepare between now and then. Still submit your application, because that way you can get that academic evaluation. Optomcast audits and verifies your transcript and your GPA. You can get that clock started so that you have your file verified, and then the OAT is the last piece of the puzzle. So when you take the test, you can send us an unofficial score report, and if you have a solid score and it backs up with the rest of your application, you could get an interview invitation that same day or within a couple days. So It never hurts to start the application. It doesn't hurt to submit it before you take the OAT, and the sooner you can do so, the better.
And just to echo what Rebecca was saying, if you're taking the OAT, I'm just going to give a random date of September 15th, and you're thinking, well, there's no sense for me to apply before. Well, if you take the OAT on September 15th and do well, then you start the application process. We may not get your verified application until around the 5th or 10th of October. Conversely, if you apply now, get everything processed on September 15th, if you walk out of the testing center with a 340, 350, or a really good OAT score, and then send that to Mr. Robertson, I have seen where he has invited that same applicant almost immediately, if that were the last piece of the puzzle. So that could be the difference in almost a month as far as a time delay or a bottleneck. And especially like Ms. Griffin was saying, this time of year when we are awarding scholarships, if you can get in for a September-October interview versus a November interview, that might be a major difference in scholarship funding.
Mm-hmm. Oh, forgot about my fun little animations here. My apologies. All right.
Okay, so the cycle, as far as the invitation for interview, remember Mr. Robertson, our admissions director, does review and determine. One of the things that always leading up to this, if you have questions for your application, contact us, whether it be Mr. Robertson directly or any of us, because if you have one of those fork in the road decisions, I could either do this or I could do that, contacting us to see, well, which would be the more prudent or best route for me to take, we're happy to kind of talk to you about that. And that might keep you, on the straight line for what you need to do for an interview. So you're invited for an interview, usually a few weeks in advance of the date that your dates, I should say. You have several dates from which to choose. And then the day itself, the interview is, as I referenced early, no pun intended, a blind interview. The faculty member knows nothing about you. And the reason we do that, we're human. If I know I'm interviewing a 4-point student with a 400 on the OAT, and the applicant cannot say 2 words together, I might be influenced by, wow, but they have a 4-point GPA. Conversely, if someone has a D on their transcript, but aside from that is very impressive and has a great interview, I wouldn't want that D to tarnish or bias the interview. It'll be reviewed later, don't get me wrong, but we want the interview to be as genuine and as innocent as possible. We're a clinic-driven school, and my objective with the interview is as if you were going into an exam with a patient you've never seen before. Can you explain to Mrs. Smith what's going on with her vision that day? Can you explain to Mrs. Smith how you're going to treat and manage her conditions? So therefore, if we know nothing about you going into the interview and you answered all the interviewer's questions, we feel that's not terribly different than what it's like in patient care, talking with a patient for the first time. As we referenced earlier in the interview day, there's also a counseling session, the open file review with officers like Ms. Griffin and myself, Mr. Robertson, Ms. Ewing, and then you also have a financial aid housing session. And then after that, within a few days, we go before the admissions committee. Okay, so before the interview, your travel itinerary. Depending upon how far you're coming, if you're driving or flying, don't book a flight that gets you into Memphis 30 minutes before the interview. You want to give yourself some cushion just in case if you have a connecting flight or if your flight is modestly delayed. You don't want to add to the stress of the interview by cutting it very, very close. Also, you want to spend some time in Memphis, especially if you've never visited the city before. Mike Robertson, again, will send out this little summary of things going on in Memphis the weekend that you're interviewing, as far as things are maybe unique or specific to that weekend. So it helps you maybe, oh, well, there's a festival downtown. Let me go see that, or there's a special day with this or that. Bringing guests is, we get this question a lot. Should I or should I not bring anyone? And I think that's completely up to you. It's about 50-50 as far as people who do bring guests and people who do not. I'll say this, I'm a parent, So I'll kind of say this about other parents. If you have a helicopter parent and that parent makes you nervous, don't bring them. Conversely, if you have a parent, a spouse, a significant other that you feel, boy, I'd like for them to see the school too, so that when we're driving back, I can bounce some things off. It all depends, in my opinion, what will make you most comfortable and confident for the day, as far as whether you do or don't bring any guests. You can't go wrong either way, because about 50% do and 50% don't. Now, what to wear? I just had an email from a female student talking about our white coat ceremony and what kind of dress should she wear. And I had a little bit of a struggle going into specifics about that. But professionalism isn't abstract, but yet you know it when you see it. Gentlemen, I would advise wearing a coat and tie. No one's ever offended if you're wearing a coat and tie. Ladies, wearing something that you would wear for an interview, whether that be a suit, whether that be a dress. If you were wearing a dress, just make sure it's appropriate length and conservative, just because, again, you don't want to give the interviewer or anyone the wrong impression. As far as if you show up in t-shirt and jeans, the interviewer might say, well, they're not really taking this seriously. So you don't feel like you have to rent a tuxedo or wear an evening gown or something, but you want to dress appropriately as if you were going to a job interview.
And I'd really like to emphasize spending time in Memphis, that's something that you can make happen when you come here for the interview. I'm not from Memphis myself. I'm from Michigan. Go Blue. And so I think Memphis is such a great city that if you have time to experience even for a day, you'll really find a lot that you enjoy. And when you think about the optometry school you want to go to, you're thinking about 4 years of your life you're going to spend in that city. And granted, you do spend a lot of time in a classroom, in a clinic, in the library studying, but I would really love for you to get to see this really, really neat city. And if you fly in just for the interview and you stay really close to campus in the medical district, seeing the medical district isn't going to give you the full scope of what the city of Memphis offers. So like Mr. Hauser said, there is a ton of really cool stuff going on in the city, and we try to give you some suggestions. I'm always happy to share my recommendations for neat things to do, even if you have just a few hours or just a day to spend here. But you want to get acquainted with the city you could potentially be living in for 4 years before you make your decision to do so.
And we do not have dormitories on campus if you've never visited our school before, but about 70% of our students live within 10 minutes of campus. And there's some really neat areas. So I think at a minimum, if you had the ability or time to drive around, and we can give you the places that students live in advance, or certainly you can do it afterwards, just to kind of see. There's a place called Mud Island where about 50 to 55% of our students live. That's really, really neat. That I think at least gives a student a good perspective of, okay, well, this is where a lot of the SEO students live, and I think you'll be very, very pleased. Okay, preparation is the key. That can be said about a lot of things in life. What to expect? You don't want to be so rehearsed that you sound memorized, but being prepared, there's nothing wrong with that either. Be prepared to talk about yourself, and for some that's troublesome. Well, I don't want to brag, or I don't want to come across cocky or anything like that. But just be able to, what makes you tick? What's important to you? What are you looking for in a school? Those are things that are very fair questions to be prepared to answer. Why do you want to be an optometrist? You should be able to answer that if you're applying to optometry school. And it may not be the same answer for every student. There's not a perfect answer to that question. What would you do if optometry school doesn't work out? Now that can be perceived a little tricky. It's not meant to be a gotcha moment, but if you were not to get into optometry school this year, what would be your plan B? Would it be to reapply? Would it be to seek other careers or open the doors? It's not again a right or wrong answer to that question. You always have the chance to ask questions or add. Especially if you feel like, well, none of the questions the interviewer gave me allowed me to highlight some of the things I want the interviewer to know. So, if you've had something significant in your life or in your educational career that you would like for that interviewer to know, the end of the interview is another great opportunity to say, oh, I would like you to know that I participated in the last Olympics or something significant that we actually have had an Olympian in our program, so that's probably why I referenced that. But that's something that you certainly had the opportunity to give the interviewer.
And in this case, I don't necessarily think that practice makes perfect because nerve-wracking situations can throw you for a loop sometimes, but practice can certainly help. So have a friend, have a family member, have an advisor, someone just throw a couple questions your way so you can get in the mind frame of having to think on your feet and answer some of these common questions, and they can give you feedback on anything that you do, nervous habits that you can try to practice not doing. So any kind of practice you can do ahead of time will help.
So during the interview, you want to connect with the interviewer, and we're not going to know necessarily well in advance who your interview. We have about 15 faculty who do interviews over the years, so we like to kind of keep it diverse like that. But answer the questions. It can be frustrating to an interviewer if the interviewer asks about, well, tell me about your experience in optometry, and you talk about something totally different. Try to answer the questions directly. It makes their job easier. Things like eye contact. If try to look the interviewer square in the eye versus looking down. We realize you're going to be nervous. That goes without saying. But there is a difference between nervous energy and etiquette. So just try to answer the questions directly for the interviewer. Try to have a little fun with it without being, unprofessional. But hopefully make it. Our goal is for this to be a conversation, not so much an interview. And then again, going back to answering the question, you don't want the interviewer to ask you the question 3 or 4 times or press you for an answer. If they ask you a question, even if the answer might be perceived as negative, like what was your biggest challenge? And you say, oh, I failed organic chemistry. I don't want to say that. Well, guess what? The transcript is going to have it on there, so we're going to eventually see it anyway. So you may as well address it in the interview, and proactively, I think, is always the best route. Okay, the next steps after the interviewer. Should you follow up with your interviewer? I always think it's common courtesy to either, and you'll get the business card of the interviewer, of sending a little thank you note or an email thanking the interviewer for the time. And who knows, you might have a question that pops up after the interview. If you interview on a Friday and over that weekend something comes up, oh, I wish I had a chance to ask Dr. X or Dr. Y. Let them know by email. It's perfectly fine. How to accept, delay, or decline an admissions offer. This time of year, if students accept it, we give you 8 weeks to decide, because we want to give you and every applicant the opportunity to fulfill interview invitations at other schools. It does frustrate me a little bit when I hear of another school this time of year pressing you for a $1,000 non-refundable deposit in 2 weeks. I can't control what other schools do, but I can control what we do. But if a week after being accepted, okay, I know I'm going to go to another school, it is courtesy to let the school know versus just letting it play out for 7 more weeks, because that offer could go to another student. You certainly have every prerogative to hold it for 8 weeks, especially if you're truly deciding on what's best. But once you know definitively, it's always best to let each of the schools know. And then how to follow up on suggestions. If the admissions committee says, John, Jane, everything was great, but we do think you need more experience in the field. That's the only Achilles that you have. Tackle it, embrace it, and let us know. And then let us know once you have been able to accomplish that.
All right, so that brings us to the end of the presentation. I do see a few questions that have come through, so I'm going to pose those to Mr. Hauser. But feel free, for the next few minutes to write your questions into the question box so we can answer them. The first one is, will we be told the name of our interviewer before we get there?
No, we do not. First of all, in some respects, we may not know 100% who specifically will be interviewing even the day before, or it happens sometimes when a faculty member gets sick or something happens and we have to do some last minute adjustments. So if an applicant were scheduled to interview with Dr. Gregory Wolf and it changes and you get me instead, I don't want to disappoint you. I looked up Dr. Wolf online. I was so excited to talk to him and interview with him, and I get Joe Hauser instead. So we do not let you know. We do let you know your tour guides in advance. So if you wanted to connect with your tour guides to learn a little bit more about Memphis or get their perspective of SEO, you certainly have that at your disposal.
This is a good question. Aside from poor conversational skills, inappropriate attire, not knowing much about optometry, what are some of the red flags that you've seen during an interview?
Wow, that is a good question. Apathy, body language. It may not be perfect, but sometimes we just get the impression, does this person really want to be here? And that may be incorrect, but I'm giving a presentation later this week to orientation about professionalism and making first impressions. And so if you're sitting out in the lobby, you don't want to be kind of slumped over and kicking your feet up on the couch, or someone's talking to you, you're on your mobile device and always looking down and not engaging. It's not meant to be an act, but we certainly sometimes can assess whether someone is truly engaged, and that comes across. And even though the interview is the interview and that's the formal part of it, when you're on tour with the ambassadors, an oddity last year, we had someone leaving paper breadcrumbs on the tour. Like, he kept tearing up paper, almost like a trail like you'd have out in the woods or something. And the student really didn't know how to respond to that kind of behavior, but was basically littering and doing that. I'm sure it was a nervous habit or a tick, but it was a very off-putting behavior. So just be engaged with your tour guide as well as the interview. But again, if you're excited to be here, and it's not an extrovert introvert thing. You don't feel like you have to be, hey, it's really great to be here, or stuff like that. But we can just tell when someone's engaged, and if you put forth the effort of that engagement, whether you're introverted, extroverted, or somewhere in the middle, it'll come across.
Will we find out if we got a scholarship when we are given our acceptance?
Not immediately, but shortly thereafter. Like Ms. Griffin was referring earlier, we've accepted, I believe, 19 students for the class for 2019. So very early in the cycle, and they were accepted on a Tuesday. And by that Friday, a number of those students were offered scholarships. So what we do is and I guess I supervise the scholarship selection process. When we go to committee to review the admissions, I like to observe the comments of everyone on the committee about an applicant, not just their numbers. And I can't really do that in advance. So I like to see, what does your interviewer say? What do the other members of the committee have to say, or what's impressive? And then I give it a day or two to kind of digest and then evaluate each student's credentials. So it's not on the day because we have to meet as a committee, but usually very shortly after the interview, and certainly within a few days after the admissions committee, would a student learn if they're receiving a scholarship.
Can you describe what happens during the counseling session? Is this more informational, or is this in a way part of the interview?
Well, I'll answer this way. Everything is a part of the interview. And I say that not in a gotcha moment, but if you show up and you're rude to the front desk receptionist, that's going to be noticed. So it's not a part of the formal interview, but how you interact and your professionalism doesn't start and stop with the formal interview. The counseling session it can vary, because there might be parts of your file in your interview that the admissions officer has to probe a little bit to find out, well, did you mean this by this or this by that? or need to follow up questions about whether it be you had a challenging term. Well, what if anything happened that term? Or if it's about experience in the field or outside activities or your essay. Remember, the interviewer has not read your essay, but the admissions officer has. So the counseling session isn't a part of the formal interview, but the purpose of it may complement will complement the interview. It may depend upon if there's anything that we need to follow up on as a part of your application.
We also talk logistics to some degree. We go over things like prerequisite courses, and we talk a little bit about the admissions process and what it'll look like moving forward from that day. So we had a question about guests, just repeating a little bit about what the guests do if they come with the applicant.
Yeah, really the guests are invited to about half the functions. They're not a part of the interview and they're not a part of the counseling session, but they are invited and encouraged to go on the tour and also to go to the housing and financial aid luncheon. So, that probably takes up 2.5 of the 4 hours right there. The other time, typically guests are in the lobby with other guests, and a number of us, myself included, when there is that downtime, when either you're in your interview or in counseling session, we up here in the administration, but also a lot of our students will come up during that time, especially they say, oh, there's someone from my home state interviewing today, and we'll come up to say, oh, I'm also from Minnesota. Just want to come up and say hi. And so your guest may not be engaged every minute like you will be, but usually in that downtime there will be those of us that either come on the 11th floor or students or faculty. Sometimes our president, Dr. Reich, loves to meet our applicants and guests. He'll come out and just and chit chat with applicants and their guests quite a bit often too. So your family members or spouses or significant others or other guests will definitely be engaged.
All right, we had a question about the slides being posted. I will share the slides with everyone who registered, and we're recording this session as well. So I will post the recording to our YouTube page. We have recordings of all the webinars we've done in the last couple of years on our YouTube page, so definitely take a look at that. And on our website, you'll see what the webinar schedule will be like for this upcoming fall semester. So yes, I will share the recording of this session as well as the slides. I have a question. Someone who's coming in for the interview in a couple weeks, what's the best way to get around Memphis, Uber, rent a car, etc.?
Well, it may depend on how much time you have. If you're here for the full weekend, then renting a car might be more applicable. If you're here and by the time between getting from the airport to the hotel or just simply depending on how close you are and things like that, then certainly Uber, Lyft, etc. Memphis does not have a mass transit or like a subway system or light rail like you would see in a Chicago, New York, etc. But if you were spending a good bit of time, it may make sense to rent a car so you can drive around. If you're here for, in essence, one day and you're really looking at, well, I just need a ride from the airport to and from and maybe a ride after the interview to a certain place, and I would say Uber or Lyft would be more economical.
We do have Zip cars here in the city too, so if any of you are already members of Zip Car, then there are a handful of places around town you can pick up a car in that way. Another question, at the interview, will we meet every faculty member that is making a decision on our interview?
No, and that's intentional. We have one member of the faculty interview team, and I won't say who he is, who intentionally does not meet the applicant. And that's to keep a certain level of objectivity. We're human, so we don't want to get too caught off guard, positively or negatively. Like if Rebecca is a diehard University of Michigan fan and someone from Ohio State interviewer, she might subconsciously have a little bias. That is a joke, but we all have our biases. It's a human nature aspect. So the one interviewer one faculty member who's on the interview team that intentionally does not meet, that is to keep things objective, where he can look at files and say, well, I don't care what kind of tie they wore. This person has a good GPA OAT, or conversely, I don't care how nice they are. I'm concerned about this. But you will be meeting a lot of faculty, a lot of administration, a lot of people who are involved in the admissions process.
How do parents typically dress?
Not rarely. You don't. A parent can dress, like a father can dress in coat and tie if he pleases. But usually the parent will be a little more comfortably dressed. I won't go so far as usually saying t-shirt and jeans, but like, khakis and a polo, or a little bit warmer weather, colder weather, khakis and a sweater, or for the ladies, appropriate but more casual clothing is very appropriate. So if a father wore a button down in khakis or a polo in khakis, that would be perfectly fine and appropriate. And if a mother were to dress accordingly, don't feel like they have to dress at the same level as you are.
All right. Well, thank you all for your questions. We'll give it another couple seconds if there are any other questions that come through. But I want to thank Mr. Hauser for his time this afternoon and for sharing all of his wisdom. And thank you all for participating. We look forward to meeting many of you as you go through the admissions process this year, and some of you hopefully in the years to come. And do feel free to contact either of us, if I can say so, for Mr. Hauser.
Yes.
Either of us, if you have any follow-up questions or any thoughts that pop up in your head. That's what we're here for. We're here to help you and help you learn about our program, our school, to get connected to some of our students, and really just to support you with whatever it is that you need support with. So feel free to give us an email or give us a call, anytime. We're happy to chat with you.
The only bad question is the one not asked.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Did one more come up? Okay.
Well, thank you all again. Hope you have a great afternoon, and we look forward to having you join us at some webinars in the future. Oh, there's one last question. Let's see. How else can we ask about the institution? I'm not sure exactly what you mean by the institution.
Well, I'm going to take a stab at this. When we interview, I think a very fair question and an appropriate question of your interviewer might be to ask them, what do you like about being either on faculty or working at SCO? What do you think are the strengths of SCO? I think that is a very, very, or you can ask the interviewer, what parts of instruction are you involved in? Are you in the clinic? Are you teaching? Are you in lab and research, or all of the above? And then trying to get their perspective, because many of our faculty that do interviews actually went to other optometry schools. So you might have a faculty member who graduated from Indiana University College of Optometry, but is on our faculty here. So that faculty member would have perspective of at least two schools, or maybe they've been at a faculty member at other institutions. So it could be a wealth of experience or a worthy question to ask your faculty interviewer. What do you like about the institution? And then, like Miss Griffin was referring, afterwards, if there's anything that wasn't either clearly defined or answered after your interview, contact us. If you have a specific question or anything that's important to you to learn about, and we'll tell you the full skinny, because I would rather answer a question fully, even if it leads you to another school, because in essence, I'm the dean of students. The worst thing I can do is tell you what you want to hear and lie to you, and you come to SCO and then you realize, hey, that Mr. Hauser didn't tell me the truth. That's going to be a disgruntled student, and that makes my life less fun. So I'd hate to lose somebody that we've accepted or would like to come here, but I'd rather be forthright on the front end than telling you what you want to hear. So hoping that addresses the specific question about the institution is don't feel free, I mean, certainly feel free to ask questions during the interview of your interviewer, your tour guide, or other people that you meet to get their perspective on SEO.
All right. That's all we have for you guys. So thanks again and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.